If you would like family-friendly sermons featuring different pastors, you should check out my playlist on the subject. And also throughout this platform, there are different family-friendly productions, including a video where I speak about the gender war, a video where I speak about the Black Nuclear Family Collective. I have other content as well that speaks about the Black family, Black marriages, hopefully in a godly/empowering sense. So just sift throughout this platform and throughout this specific playlist for content that hopefully can be edifying. This is my 11th video of Sermons Excerpts playlist. So hopefully the imagery and subject matter will be enticing. Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sermon Excerpts. And what makes this specific episode unique is that I'm not going to be using previously cited database content, and as such will place the citations of each image to its respective users throughout the dialogue. Likewise, there are 2 excerpts in this episode from 2 separate pastors by the names of Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley and Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman. To honor the citations, I will be cutting up the excerpts into parts. That way I don't have to flood all citations at the end and therefore have the citations not be recognized for their respective owners. For more information regarding this episode, feel free to look into the description box where I place any corresponding information for all of my videos. This sermon excerpt, entitled There Are No Huxtables, by Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley, from the Alfred Street Baptist Church.
As we enter into this month of February, where we rightfully celebrate and acknowledge the history and the heritage of African Americans in this land, I feel a real compulsion of the Holy Spirit to spend the next few weekends speaking and talking about family, particularly the Black family. C. Eric Lincoln, one of the most respected and renowned scholars and sociologists of a past generation, once said that African American Black life in this land has been supported and sustained by 5 entities: the Black church, Black businesses and Black banks, Black journalism and the Black press, Black colleges and universities, and most importantly, the Black family. Lincoln would go on to argue that Black life was able to endure the harsh realities of racism in the United States of America because of the power of the Black family. Beloved, I came by to argue with you and to share that in my belief, there are very few things in life that can shape who you are and who you are not more than your family. If you go to the doctor, they're not just going to ask you about your own condition. They're going to know about your family medical history, because family affects your health. Being abandoned by a parent, being beaten by a grandmother or grandfather can alter your self-esteem, because family affects who you see when you look in the mirror. It's been proven that the dynamics of romantic relationship that a child is exposed to between their parents will affect how that child operates in their own relationships, because family shapes how you see and you define love. a parent's presence or absence, their affection or their rejection will determine whether or not you even want a family of your own. Because family determines if you want to have more family. Alcoholism, addiction, anger, abuse, those can all be passed from generation to generation within a family. Because family determines how you cope with the challenges of life and how you're going to treat other people. And sociologists have been able to find a link between criminal behavior and family upbringing. Because family affects your moral compass of what you determine and define is right and what is wrong. For good and for bad, family has the influential ability to shape who we are and who we are not. Very few generations go above the socioeconomic and educational plateaus of their predecessors, because family affects what you believe is possible in your own life. Few things in life shape what we believe we can be more than family. I want you to listen to the genealogy of Jesus Christ as is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew chapter 1, beginning in verse number 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Today, I want to entitle this first session, this first message, this first lesson on family. I want to give it the title, There Are No Huxtables. As you all know, I'm proud to be from the south side of Chicago, a city that is sadly known for its violence as well as its summertime activities. Being born in the 70s and coming of age in the 80s, I lived in Chicago in the time when gangs were on the rise. The city was becoming violent. It was the time of the Disciples, the Vice Lords, the Blackstone Rangers, Folks, Brothers, the El Rookins. Gangs were abundant in Chicago. But what was amazing is that it was statistically proven by data that Thursday nights were the most peaceful nights in Chicago. There were fewer murders on Thursday nights in the 80s than there were any other night of the week. Phone calls to 911 were reduced on Thursday evenings. Gang violence was not rampant on Thursday evenings. Thursday evenings were the most peaceful times, not only in Chicago, but in black communities all around the nation in the 1980s. Why? Because on Thursday nights, The Cosby Show came on. And even hardened criminals and wannabe gangsters sat down on Thursday nights to watch The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show was like none other. It aired in 1984, had 8 seasons, and for 5 of them sat atop the Nielsen ratings as the most watched television show in the nation. The only other show that rivaled The Cosby Show with those numbers was All in the Family. The Cosby Show, which was the greatest television hit of the 80s, The Cosby Show single-handedly saved NBC from bankruptcy. The TV Guide would go on to say that The Cosby Show was one of the 50th greatest television shows in the history of television. Everyone loved The Cosby Show. It won numerous awards: Emmys, People's Choice Awards, NAACP Image Awards. And The Cosby Show, more than any other show, was responsible for opening the doors of success for future all-black casted television shows. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Martin, Living Single, Family Matters, and even shows today like Blackish are indebted to The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show did something for black people. It exposed America to a portrait of the black family that America had not seen and was not used to. Sure, we had good times, but good times locked the black family into poverty. Sure, we had the Jeffersons, an upperly mobile couple, but there was no family, no parenting with it. America had seen black family in What's Happening, but What's Happening reinforced the image of the absentee black father. And so when The Cosby Show came out, it was groundbreaking because it showed black family at its best. The Cosby Show showed us a loving marriage between a black power couple, a doctor and a lawyer raising their 5 children together. There were no baby mamas in The Cosby Show. There were no absentee daddies in The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show revealed to us what a loving couple could do as they raised their children to be successful. It showed us how family could be supportive and sustained in times of trouble. The Cosby Show showed us what we had not seen before. And maybe that's why we sat down every Thursday night to watch the lives of Claire and Theo, and Rudy and Vanessa and Sandra and Denise and Olivia and Cliff Huxtable, who was deemed the greatest television father of all times. The Cosby Show gave us black family at its best. And maybe that's why the events of 2018 were so disturbing to us. Because in 2018, we came to the realization that our beloved Cliff Huxtable was also the predatory Bill Cosby, who in 2018 was convicted on 3 counts of aggravated, indecent sexual assault, while we listened to allegations and accusations of dozens more. And in that conviction of the greatest TV dad of all time, we had to wrestle with the fact that the Huxtable we saw on TV was not the Cosby we got in real life. And I know that the issue of Bill Cosby is a sensitive one within our communities, but I raise it to expose a mythology and share with us the reality that there are no Huxtables. Families have to deal with disappointment and dysfunction. Families have to face brokenness. Families have deep, dark, hidden secrets. Families have to deal with abandonment and violence, and oftentimes some sexually inappropriate activity. Families are made up of selfish siblings and greedy cousins, and sides of the family that don't talk to one another because of some financial fallout. Families have to learn to forgive words that should have never been spoken by someone who shares your last name. And beloved, one of the most difficult, inevitable, and maturing moments for all of us is when we come to the harsh realization that maybe, just maybe, you've got as much, if not more, Cosby than Huxtable in your family. When you've got to come to the realization that your family has some darkness in it, some dysfunction, some division, some abuse, some addiction, some incarceration, that there is no Huxtable, but there's a whole lot of Cosby in our families.
That is all we have for this specific sermon. Keep listening for more. That is all we have for this specific sermon. Keep listening for more. This sermon, entitled Reclaiming a Black Theology for the Black Church, by Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, as presented at the 2023 Hamptons Ministers Conference.
And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians, whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. I'd like to speak with you briefly on the subject, toward the destruction of Pharaoh's army, reclaiming a black theology for the black church. Toward the destruction of Pharaoh's army, reclaiming a black theology for the black church. Our theology is especially significant for the black church right now because in the year of our Lord 2023, black people are in trouble. James Halcone, my teacher and the father of black theology, would say, what's the use, church, of saving souls if you can't save bodies? And in times like these, the spirit of what black preachers say about God must be tested, and it must be held accountable to the flesh and blood realities of the people we say we serve. Black people and poor people who are disproportionately black are living and dying in a neo-fascist Christian nationalist regime whose social and political machinations are the mirror image of the white so-called Christian colonial imagination that enslaved Africans while decimating indigenous nations and peoples in the 15th and 16th centuries. They kept us in chains until the end of the 19th century. And then in the early 20th century, they traded in our shackles for a lynch noose. And then in the late 20th century, they exchanged the lynch noose for handcuffs and more jail cells. And now in the new millennium, they no longer just ban us from stores and lunch counters, but they have the unmitigated gall to ban books, reverting decidedly Ron DeSantis to 17th century slave codes that made it illegal for black children to read. Come on, Alice Walker, Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, James Cone, Amanda Gorman, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ralph Ellison, Zora Neale Hurston. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And now in the new millennium, instead of stringing us up, they pin us down with a knee on our necks, asphyxiating us in broad daylight, all for walking while black, working while black, learning while black, driving while black, staying home while black, getting groceries while black, pumping gas while black, taking a wrong turn while black, worshiping in our churches at Bible study while black, all as the so-called religious right, the so-called moral majority try to sell us on a God who doesn't see color, a God who loves money and war. This, sisters and brothers, is a white God that the all-powerful pharaohs of the modern world want our children to worship, to bow down to lift holy hands to sing praises to, and all kinds of Christian contemporary music to, and amidst this kind of demonic navel gazing that makes a God out of what is not God, out of the all-encompassing hegemony of white power, it's easy to forget who we say God is. But I stopped by to remind you. We are the black church, not because we wanted to be, but because we had to be.
We are the black church, not because we wanted to be, but because we had to be.
Before before we could distinguish ourselves one from another on the basis of polity, we were just the black church, born in the woods under the cover of night as an invisible institution where nobody could hear us pray. We were a fugitive enterprise, as it was illegal for black people to gather outside the gaze of white surveillance. We were a church of renegades that emerged in resistance to a racist status quo that would have our children be illiterate hewers of wood in perpetuity. The white man said, "Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be for all generations." And somehow, amidst this kind of politically entrenched spiritual wickedness that hanged our foremothers and forefathers from poplar trees, that burned them on pyres of wood, that scorched our churches and set ablaze our schools, that terrorized our community, kept our money, stole our land and our children. Amidst this kind of spiritual wickedness, black people prayed and black people sang. They put their face to pots and to the earth to mute their sound so that old massa, they wouldn't hear us crying out to the Most High God to deliver us from master's evil under the cover of night. Under the cover of night, they conjured the power of a God who opposed the powerful in the land, a God of the Exodus, who affirms the humanity of the enslaved and liberates them by force from the weight of social and political oppression. And here is precisely where black theology for the black church begins. It begins with a radical God talk that invokes who we know God is and proposes that God is on the side of the oppressed. And God, on the side of the oppressed, is empowering them to actively rebel against the doctrine of white supremacy and its concomitant logics of sexism, classism, genocide, heterosexism, ableism, colorism, texturism, speciesism, and anything that opposes black freedom. The black church was the place where the slave became preacher, where the slave became sister or brother, where black identity could be reestablished beyond the status quo designation as non-human. The black church contends that all persons are to be free, that all persons are made in the image of God, and that since God is free and humanity is created free in God's image, the struggle to recover freedom must forever be maintained. We can't sit silent in the face of what's going on in our nation and in our world today. Black Christianity and the black theological imagination affirms freedom. It affirms liberation as the purpose of God. We say, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. But we must remember, black people, that black Africans had religion before they were brought to the Americas. Not only had black Africans been part and parcel of the Christian narrative, the Jesus event, before we reached the shores of the American colonies, it was, an Ethiopian unit. The point is merely that black Africans, black people had religious systems and a concept of the sacred before confluence with Europeans. Black Africans knew God before they were enslaved in America, and it is precisely this sacred epistemology that becomes the groundwork for the slaves' creative revaluation of white Christianity. The emergence of slave religion, which would become the black church, is grounded in the pre-existence of African indigenous religion. Every time you do an usher's march, every time you clap on a syncopated beat, every time the preacher calls and the church answers, you are leaning in to your African identity. The collision come on, black Africa, America. How, white people, can you preach a God of freedom to a slave? And this suspicion compelled black people, slaves and free. We're just an hour away from Nat Turner's rebellion. It compelled black people, slave and free, to embrace biblical stories in radical opposition to what white preachers generally upheld, and to embrace biblical stories of liberation rather than subjugation. As it relates to the Bible, to connect the liberating activity of God to God's liberating activity on behalf of black people in the world, to claim that God is on the side of the oppressed and not the oppressors, most especially in line with the Exodus and Luke 4, and to note that God siding with the poor is to demonstrate the universality of grace. In short, suspicion gave license for the oppressed to deploy agency in terms of the substance of their faith. No, I don't want to read Philemon, I want to read Moses. No, I don't want to hear from Paul today, I want to hear from Jesus. Black theology contends That God is not a white man with blue eyes and a beard, contrary to what your stained glass windows say. But God is a liberator. And the message of liberation is the revelation of God for the church. The revelation of God as liberator requires preaching and service and fellowship that accords with this truth, that God is a God of liberation, and the message of liberation is the revelation of God in Christ. Preaching is the manifestation of God's work in the world, and as such, black preaching ought to announce freedom. Black preaching ought to announce freedom as the reality of God, for this is what God does in the world. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because it hath anointed me to preach deliverance to the captive. God's activity in the world is an activity of liberation. Jesus says, take up thy mat and walk. Go and sin no more. Preaching ought to announce this freedom as the ultimate reality of God. Service in the church is the calling to join Christ in the work of liberating the oppressed from the enemy. Black theology contends that evidence of the church's service is revealed only in its readiness to go where the suffering are. And while among those who suffer, its willingness to claim and embody the burden that they carry as its own. We lose our identity as the black church when we are guided by logics of capitalist acquisition, more money, more money, more money, which is fundamentally anti-black. It is in light of biblical revelation of a God who is oppressed with us, and God's historical participation in liberating the oppressed, that black theology makes its ultimate claim. And that is that God is black. And not only that God is black, but that the blackness of God cannot be ignored, because God's blackness is the heart of God's identity. Now, white folks and black folks who aspire to be white get very nervous when you say God is black. What do you mean God is black? All lives matter. White folks and black folks who aspire to be white, they get nervous, because the last thing we're supposed to want to be is what we are. Blackness has historically corresponded with the worst of all history, with what is inferior, with what is the oppressed condition of humankind. How can God be black? Well, the Bible says that he was born in the poverty of a barn, and that he died as a slave on a cross with his hands up. God's blackness may not be a biological condition, although the historical Jesus was not white. But God's blackness means that God has made the oppressed condition God's own condition. Black theology asserts that God is made known where people experience humiliation and suffering, and the presence of God among the humiliated and the suffering is toward the end of their liberation. Now, Someone is wondering, how can God be a liberator when the facts of history reveal that Pharaoh is still hot on our tracks? Those of us who read our Bibles know that biblical revelation in the Old Testament and the New tells us that God is a liberator who's on the side of the oppressed. But the realities of our time confirm that Pharaoh is still on our tracks. And in times like these, when black people are still catching hell, and in times like these, when black people are still catching hell at the intersection of social, political, and economic structural evil, when the adversary now wears a police uniform and a judge's robe and a doctor's lab coat and a politician's suit and a teacher's blazer and maybe even a clergy robe, when our children are subject to the tentacles of American apartheid in the street and the schoolhouse, in the courtroom, in the sick room, and on Capitol Hill, we might find ourselves wondering with that great black theologian William R. Jones, if God is really on the side of the oppressed. We might find ourselves wondering with my preaching sister Naomi Washington Leapart if black lives really do matter to God at all. When Pharaoh keeps on coming, Exodus 14 says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue. When Pharaoh keeps on coming, we might ask with the psalmist, how long, O Lord, will you forget me? How long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me when your life is under constant threat, when you're sick in your body and you can't get well, when your daddy up and dies and dementia takes your mama's mind, when you're about to lose your job, when the money is funny and the change is strange, when Sally Mae changes her name to Navient but is the same old monkey on your back, when the IRS comes knocking at your door, when you lose your health insurance, when your children are shot down like dogs, when Pharaoh is still hot on our tracks, it's easy to lose our mind to the ways of this whitewashed world and to begin to second guess who we know, what we know to be true about who God is. No, she wasn't a great patriarch of the church. and she'll never be invoked among the apostolic fathers. But my grandmother, as she mopped dirty floors and cleaned filthy kitchens, she still had hold of her mind, and she'd construct theology with every stroke. She'd move to the right and say he's the Lion of Judah. She'd move to the left and say he's the Rose of Sharon. She'd move back and say he's the Root of Jesse. She'd move front and say he's the fairest of 10,000, the author and the finisher, the Alpha and the Omega, the light and my salvation. Oh, amidst the nasty, foul, corrupt, unscrupulous, anti-black mess of the world, I stopped by to ask somebody, who do you say that I am? We are the black church, and the black theology for the black churches tells us that we ought not shrivel, we ought not shrink, we ought not stumble in the face of the pharaohs of this world. Pharaoh is still hot on our tracks, but Moses said unto the people of God, fear ye not, for the Lord who has already liberated you is gonna fight for you too. God is not only on the side of the oppressed, but God fights for us by any means necessary. He told old Pharaoh a long time ago in street parlance, I'm gonna get you, sucker. Then the song says, Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. But the psalmist says it like this: when the wicked came to devour my flesh, they stumbled and they fell. Though an host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, in this will I be confident. Our God will fight for us. That's why they call him Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. That's why they call him Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. That's why they call him Jehovah Nishi, the Lord our banner. Our God knows how to fight, and so do I. I went to kickboxing class last week, and my kickboxing coach told me that when you are under attack, when you are being assaulted by an enemy, the first thing you have to do if you want to come out alive is protect your head. Against the logics of the Ku Klux Klan, I heard Wu-Tang Clan say, protect your neck. But my coach said, if you want to win the fight, you've got to protect your head. He said, sometimes you've got to lift your hands up. And when you lift your hands up, you can better protect your head. Because ultimately, saints, if you lose control of your head, if you lose control of your head, if your head is bruised and confused, if you lose control of your head, you lose control of your mind. And if you lose control of your mind, then you ultimately lose the fight. I stopped by today with some black theology in my lecturer's quiver, because our church and our community and our culture is under attack, and we need to protect our heads. Because if you lose control of your head, you lose control of your mind, and a mind is a terrible thing to waste. While we are in the midst of battle, we have to protect our minds, our heads, so that we can think. protect your head from those who would hoodwink us and bamboozle us and lead us astray, talking about pro-life as they lock our kids up for life over a nickel bag, but allow the real thug, the real hoodlum, the real fraud, the real gangster, the real mobster, the real criminal, the real crook, the real con from Queens to run for president and maybe win again twice. We've got to protect our heads as they tell us that black people are felons, when the fact is that white boys carry out 99.9% of all mass shootings. It's giving domestic terrorism since 1492. My coach said that the way to protect your head is to raise your hands up high. Raise them up. I told you it doesn't just work in kickboxing, but it works in real life. Put them up, Hampton. Raise your hands in worship to remind yourself that we serve a God who fights for us. Put them up, Hampton. The elders would say he's a battle axe in the time of war. We serve a God who liberates us, a God who knows how to fight. The Lord will fight our battles. I don't know about you, but mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Thank you so much for listening to today's sermon excerpts. That is all I have for this episode. Stay tuned for more.